All right, good afternoon, everybody. Uneducated Economist here. So in this video, we are going to be talking about the housing market and how it is stalling out right now. This is something that is very concerning for a lot of people out there who are, in the game as far as selling houses, building houses, flipping houses, or just even wanting to get into a house. Seeing the housing market slow down as much as it has right now is making it very difficult for people to try and conduct the business that they want to do. So one of the things that I have been following for quite a few years is the demand for lumber through the futures market, or the price of the futures market indicating the demand for lumber, however you want to word that. Now, these aren't exactly correlated, but they are fairly close, that when you see a rise in demand for lumber, generally you're going to see the futures ticking up as well during that time. Yeah, however, on the flip side of that, if you see a drop in demand for lumber, then you're going to see the lumber futures falling alongside that demand, with that demand, but eventually finds its bottom where the mills are just not wanting to produce at any lower price than a particular point, where it's like the input cost and everything that goes into it is no longer a profitable position for them, so they back off on production. And this is the mill curtailments that we have experienced within the industry over the last probably a good year and a half. And so a lot of times we end up focusing in on things like tariffs and what's going to happen in the future when it comes to the imports of Canadian lumber and how that's going to impact the prices. My concern over that is very low. Like, the tariffs that we have experienced in the past has always been put in place to prevent prices from falling. Like, they don't cause prices necessarily to go up, but they do cause them to, or prevent them from falling any further, because generally the tariffs are put on Canadian lumber to prevent them from dumping cheap lumber into the United States. This is one of the accusations that the United States has put on Canada for many years, is that the subsidized lumber that they have with their mills is putting a pressure on our mills here in the United States. As this super cheap lumber comes in, it just, no longer puts the profit in a position for our mills to be able to produce and stay in operation in that fashion. Let me see if I said all that right. But that's generally what the tariffs are done. They prevent the lumber from falling any further, and that supports our mills here in the United States. What we are facing right now is not a situation in which that tariffs on Canadian lumber is going to create a major increase in prices, as the mills here in the United States will just fire up production if the prices were to move up in a substantial way. They have plenty of room to expand their operations, and in fact, there was quite a few mills that have shut down, so much so that it may be to the point that trying to fire those things back up could actually be difficult. And again, if that is to be the case, that's going to add even more profit to the other mills, which are going to start continuing to push up their operations as well. So I'm not really seeing it as far as like the tariffs creating an issue here in the United States as far as lumber prices just skyrocketing. What's going to create that situation is going to be when the home builders start ramping up production again. And so we're not going to see that taking place so long as you have home sales that have fallen as much as they have. Like, it's like a frozen housing market out there when it comes to the actual transactions of real estate. It's very slow. In fact, I was just talking with a customer here at the yard. A lot of you know that I work at a lumber yard. I do retail sales. And he's been working on a house for quite a few years, getting it up to perfect condition. Well, as close to perfect as you can get, but into the condition in which that he can now sell it. And it's been on the market for months and months and months, and he is not getting any traffic to this house. He says, obviously we're in an expensive area, so he has a pretty hefty price tag on it. But ultimately, from all the work and time and effort and energy and cost that he put into it, that's the price that he wants. And if he's not getting any traffic from it, what is he going to do? Exactly what I suspected. He's going to rent it out. Right? So now, instead of being up for sale, he's pulling it off the market, and he is going to put it up for rent. And this is something that I think has taken place quite a bit across the country. You're finding a huge amount of delistings that are happening out there because people are just literally not finding the traffic. No buyers coming to the market. then they're just sitting there kind of frustrated. They want to get something out of it, so they're going to pull it off the market, not sell it, and turn around and start renting the thing out if they can. And so this seems to be something that is happening more and more. Now, how much of an impact that has going into the future, I think only time will tell. But that should bring more rental properties to the market, which should be a bit of an alleviation for those people who are out there who are concerned about high rents and not being able to find a place to rent. I would assume that if this is the case that was to continue, the what ifs or whatever, that eventually this would start providing more rental properties out there. Whether or not it brings the price down, I think again time will tell, and that will depend on how many rentals come up and how frequently they are actually rented out. So again, pretty big question on side of all that. When it comes to lumber, like focusing in on lumber, I think is going to be the major indicator of everything that is happening out there. Like, regardless of even if you're in the building industry or real estate or anything else like that, if you're just trying to follow what's going on within the economy itself, I think following lumber is going to be a major indicator of when things turn around. Like if there is a moment of like churning around and we start having a, hop in the economy again where people are very active and flipping homes again or something of that nature, I think lumber is going to be a major indication that that is going to take place or that is actually happening. When you see lumber prices moving up dramatically due to the demand increasing, that's going to be the key. Like right now we've seen lumber ticking up, but it's not necessarily moving in a dramatic fashion, and it's certainly not moving off of increased demand. It's coming off of a limited amount of inventory that is out there and speculation of tariffs causing a problem within the industry itself. All that is, I think, is very mild comparatively, as far as the indication goes. I think that's pretty mild comparatively to what it would be if the home builder sentiment was to increase due to buyer traffic coming back to the market. If that was to happen, oh man, I'm thinking you're going to see lumber just absolutely skyrocket, as again, the mill curtailments that have taken place over the last year and a half has left very little inventory within the market. And if you start all of a sudden having permit issuance ramping up or starts ramping up and just that sentiment that is now improving, then you're going to find that there is going to be a lot of speculation and activity happening within the lumber market that's going to start pushing that lumber prices much higher. But you're not going to see it happen unless the activity is really taking place. So again, if you're following the economy, just trying to follow what's going on out there, keep an eye on those lumber futures. Keep an eye on the demand for lumber, as the permit issuance and starts should tell you whether or not that is like demand coming from the home builders, or if it's just a lack of supply and the inventory or the lack of inventory creating a situation that pushes prices higher. So again, those are two different situations that are happening. Just because the lumber futures are going up doesn't necessarily mean that's the indication that the economy is starting to ramp up. But if you see the lumber futures pushing up, and at the same time you're seeing permit issuance pushing up and housing starts pushing up, and you're seeing all these things working together, I think that's a very good sign that things have moved and are definitely, in a position in which that we would feel be like, good. Like, I don't know, good or bad. I think that's really depending on the position that you put yourself in. But I think if that was to take place, where you see the lumber moving up as far as prices go, and you see permit issuance ramping up and housing starts ramping up, to me that would be a good indication that the economy is probably doing fairly well or doing better, I don't know, however you want to describe it, as opposed to what is happening right now, where you're seeing all these things slowing down. All right, let's read some of these comments up in here. Thank you everybody for joining in on today's live stream. Housing is crashing. Stalling was early winter. Without massive QE, the crash will intensify. All right, Steve. Like, I disagree on that, right? Like, to me, a crashing like the crashes in transactions, right? The crashes in transactions. And for a lot of people out there, when they look at the things that are happening right now, they feel like, okay, so this is a terrible economy. This is horrible. This is a housing market that has completely, crashed or something of that nature. And that's simply just not the case, right? I mean, if that was the case, then the Federal Reserve will be stepping up and doing all kinds of stuff to try and bring some sort of stimulative action to the housing market, but that's not the case at all. See, the Federal Reserve is not going to be in there to make sure that housing prices stay elevated. They're not there to even make sure, like, they're the only thing that the Federal Reserve is concerned about when it comes to the housing market is that if there is a mortgage that is wanted out there, then there should be one provided to be had. Now, whether or not it's a good mortgage, that's a whole different story. Only thing that they want to make sure of is that there is one available. All right. Now, again, that's like very different from what a lot of people would think out there is, oh, the Federal Reserve is going to keep the housing market from crashing or keep the stock market from crashing and all this other stuff. And they think of pricing on that. And that's simply not, no, that's not what's going to happen. Right. The Federal Reserve wants to make sure that the credit market doesn't freeze up, that the mortgage market doesn't freeze up. That's it. Right. That's their only concern. Now, when it comes to the home builder on that side of thing, in order to provide more building to the industry, to the real estate industry, to the housing market, in order for them to do that, they have to have confidence that there's going to be a buyer there. Okay? So again, like, if the buyer is there in a very pronounced way, hey, we are here, we want to buy homes, we're willing to pay at this price, then the builder would load up. They would just like start, firing off projects and start putting them together. But if you have a group of people out there who are itching to buy a house, they really want it, and they have been holding back because the interest rates are too high or the prices are too high, but they really do want that house, that is demand that is not exactly seen, right? This is like a hidden demand, so to speak, that they're sitting on the sidelines waiting for that opportunity. Well, if you have an expectation that there is going to be lower interest rates going into the future, like if you think, oh, in June, the Federal Reserve is going to lower rates. Now, regardless if the Federal Reserve lowers rates and the mortgage rates come down, because I don't think those two are correlated, and we got evidence of that taking place over the last year, but the market doesn't quite realize that, right? And so when they hear in their mind that there's going to be lower interest rates in 6 months, they're going to back off on their purchases. They're going to say, hey, I'm going to wait 6 months and maybe I can get a better rate then, or just wait and see what happens. The moment that you feel that there's going to be lower prices going into the future, you back off on your purchasing of that home or that anything out there. It doesn't matter what it is. Now, if this starts to take place in a very dramatic fashion, what are you going to see? You're going to see a bunch of houses that are not selling, people backing out on their commitment to buy that home, right? This is what you're seeing, very prevalent within the economy. Now, people aren't necessarily taking that into consideration, that these people are very hopeful that there's a better opportunity coming in the future, and that's why they're backing off now. However, you could look at this information and say, hey, they're backing off because it's a terrible economy and they don't see a better future, right? Either way, the action here is essentially the same. It's just the meaning that the market is giving it. And now as I listen and I look around out there, I don't see any drop in the amount of people who want a home. Like whether or not they can actually afford one, that's a whole different story. Just the desire of owning, just to have one. Like, I don't see that diminishing. What I do see diminishing is the capability of these people to actually acquire a home. And those people end up pulling back and sitting on the sidelines thinking, I will never be able to buy a home. Then the moment that the opportunity becomes better for them, interest rates come down or price comes down, something of that nature, there's people within this sideline demand that doesn't necessarily expose itself, all of a sudden jumps out and says, hey, here I am, I want to buy that place. And this is where I think a lot of times people are just not seeing these two forces, right? There's just like this pent-up demand that doesn't necessarily present itself unless the opportunity shows itself. As soon as it shows itself, all of a sudden, here's all this demand that just pops up that wasn't there before. And this happens quite a bit. Right? Okay, moving on. All right, stimulus checks start with liquidity increase and interest rate drop. I liked brick, but I also like tiny. Why can't I have both? Hey man, what's happening all nighter? It's great to see you up in here, brother. All right. Let's see, all nighter and there in one live stream we got all covered. Nice. All dare, is that somebody's name? I missed that one. All right, let's cruise down here to the bottom. Eh, oh, hey, ma'am, that's what it was, huh? Hey, Brady. Cheers, all nighter hider. Okay, that's why I say have proof of finances if buying property. There's a lot of dumb money and irrational exuberance. Yeah, I can agree with that one. Yeah. Simon smiling. It's a great day. Yeah, absolutely. It's always a great day. Do you think greed has anything to do with massive increase in housing costs? Well, yeah, Dalton, but it's not just greed. Greed is a natural human emotion and experience. Like greed is natural. That's not something that is unnatural or something that think is not going to be there, right? Like greed is there. It's just part of it. The problem that we face right now with the housing cost being as expensive as it is because we have a separation between the rich and the poor. And those who are rich buy homes. And if you have a bunch of rich people who are willing to pay a higher price for it, then all the poor people are wondering why it is that they can't buy a home. It's because the rich people are buying them. Now, if you were a poor person who could construct your own home, think about what it is that you could build and have for yourself. But most people can't do that. Now, there was a time, say back in the early 80s, where people could do that. In fact, with just some limited skills and, a handful of buddies, you could probably piece together a house over the course of a summer and have something to live in. Is it a great house? Probably not, but it's a house, and it would be a house that would be worth a lot of money today, considering that most people aren't going to be able to do that. So this is one of the reasons why housing costs are as expensive as they are, is just simply because of the ability to put a house together is only available to those people who have the money. That's it. Like if you could buy a piece of land and you could construct your own home, think about what it is that you would have, how much it would be worth. But since most people can't put their own home together, you're going to have to rely on somebody else to put it together. Now you're relying on that expensive labor, the expensive permitting, or everything that goes into it that's expensive and difficult. This is one of the reasons why houses are expensive. Like if you could put one together yourself, then they wouldn't be that expensive. And you really could. I mean, there's no reason why you can't. It's just that most people don't because they're really not done that way anymore. All right. I mean, you could. I mean, I know a guy he built a really nice big house too, pretty much all by himself. The only thing I saw him contract out to anybody else was the roof, to lay down the actual roofing. But everything else, he framed and pieced together every single bit of that house all by himself, and he's been working on it for years. It's taken him a very long time, but that's not typical, right? And if people were to do that more often, there would be a hell of a lot more houses out there for sale or to be had. It would be a lot more inventory because people would be building them themselves. But since that's not the case anymore, you're going to find a whole lot less homes and they're going to be a lot more expensive. But greed is just a natural part of it. It's not the reason. It's just another part of it. But it's going to be tiny living. I mean, most tiny homes are less than 500 square feet and have no profit. And that's why they don't build them. It's because you go and you put all this time, effort, energy, money in the permits and land and labor and everything else, and you put this tiny home together, and then it's not worth as much as it costs to put it there, right? It might be a nice little home to live in and not be costing that much, but then it's not worth anything and you didn't make any money off of it, no profit. And again, is that greed? I guess, I mean, part of it. There's a Roku channel that features nothing but tiny home programs all day long. I watch it often. It makes some of the designs are just ingenious how they utilize space. Oh yeah, no problem there. All-nighter. Yeah, Nathan, my tiny house is less than 900 square feet. If you're willing to move to a place like Detroit and have a handy with tools and have some construction skills, they're actually giving homes away in Detroit. Yeah, but then you have to live in Detroit. You know, I live in Astoria, Oregon, because it's clean, it's friendly, it's nice, it's beautiful, it's expensive, and it's well worth living here. It's worth it, right? I don't want to raise my kids in Detroit, right? I don't want to live in Detroit. I want to live here with this beautiful view and these, you know, and these wonderful people and this great environment and all this other stuff. This is where I want to live, and this is why I spend as much money as I do to live here, and why I drive an old S10 around is so I can live here. Like, this is where I want to be. I don't want to be anywhere else. See? All right. Thanks, Nathan. I'm not a Roku fan. Do precious experience with them, but I'll check it out. Precarious experience. Okay. What if it was built of brick, tiny bricks that hold more value, right? Harder to steal too? All right, let's cruise down here to the bottom. Detroit has gotten better. That's some massive... Yeah, but still, I mean, it's like it's going to be very difficult to find anything that compares to what Astoria does, right? I mean, this is a beautiful, clean, friendly, old town. It's a wonderful place, right? And it's going to be very hard to match it. Lumber will be an indicator of the economy. Absolutely, it will be, right? Like, once you see lumber, and you have to think about it in two different fashions. Like, if you see lumber prices ticking up, you can't just say, oh, that's the indicator all by itself. It's the indication. If you are seeing permit issuance and housing starts ramping up at the same time, you're seeing that lumber moving up like that, that is going to be a sign of a good economy. Like, I mean, good depending on the position that you have taken. But in generally speaking, as far as most people would look at the economy, that would be a sign that things are healthy and doing well. Ramping up of production, building new homes. This is, like, you think about it, the number one manufactured product here in the United States is probably going to be building, right? Construction. Not necessarily homes, but just building in general, right? Think about the material cost that goes into it is domestically supplied for the most part. Domestic labor, domestic money, it's domestic financing. It all stays domestic. It's a very good indication that things are doing well, as people who are paying to have a building put together are doing that because they feel like the future is doing well, right? So ramping up of production and within the building industry is a very good sign that things are doing well within the economy. So if you're watching lumber and you're seeing that ticking up very quickly, and then you go over and you look at the permit issuance and you see that those are ramping up, and you're finding that this positive aspect is coming to the narrative within the mainstream media, talking about lowering interest rates or something of that nature, this is going to, like, start ramping up production. This is going to be very good for the economy. Like, all you have to do is to see those things lining up like that. I'm not trying to say that's going to happen. I'm just saying, look for that. Look for that to take place. Right? And so once it does, then you will see that at that moment, things will be looking very different. Here's the problem that I think a lot of times people are facing right now. Here's a current problem that we are facing, and you can see it happening in a lot of industries. I'm going to take metal, for example, steel. Right? We just got a notification from one of the companies that we buy our steel from. What I mean steel, like roofing metal, pole barn metal, like 3-foot wide metal that you use for siding or roofing or something like that. So we just got a notification. At the end of next month, there will be an increase of 10% on all their products. Their excuse? Due to the added tariffs. And I'm thinking, well, wait a minute here. You are preliminary. Nothing's happened yet, but they're taking action already. And so now, if they're taking action already, the people who are getting this message, all the retailers, they are now informing their customer, hey, we're going to have a 10% increase here coming up pretty soon. Those people, you know, and the customers, you know, I'm telling my customer, the customer is now receiving this information, and when they are doing their bids, because they don't know exactly what's happening in the future, ramping up their bids. Now, again, all this stuff is starting to take place, but yet nothing has changed yet, except the people's expectations and then their feelings on what it is that they are going to do with their bids and their quotes and stuff like that going out there in the future. Like I tell people, I haven't seen it yet. Right now I'm quoting this. If you come back to me in 30 days, it's going to be a different price. Okay? They don't hear, okay, I've got to act fast, I got to take advantage of this price. What they hear is, okay, I need to mark up my price because at the end of next month, if I haven't gotten this bid by that time or made the purchase, I'm going to be paying a higher price. We'll just go ahead and just jump right up to that higher price and go with that for now. That way we can be safe. Okay. Even though, again, nothing has happened. I'm seeing this, I'm witnessing this take place right now. This is creating an inflationary scenario simply off of expectations. Now, the credible threat is real, right? And it really could take place here in the future, that there would be a significant increase in the input costs and the price of steel and all this other stuff. But ultimately, everything that has taken action right now is acting in expectations and not off of anything that is reality-based, because nothing has happened yet. I see this so often. All right, so I saw a feature on the news about a first 3D printed home building company with a crew of about 12 people that literally 3D print a home and then wire it and plumb it and outfit the whole thing. Yeah, and that's all well and good, but I have to question whether or not you're going to be able to print out a 3D printed home in the rain. Like, is it going to be something of good quality when you have 9 months of rain that are constantly pouring down on the ability to run a little strip of concrete over and over itself as they print up the walls on this house? See, I'm thinking of the Pacific Northwest. If you want to build 24/7, you have to have a style of building that can operate in any weather condition. Now, granted, it ain't fun, but you can frame a house up out of wood in the middle of winter in the downpouring rain. Can you 3D print a house when you have 2 inches of rain that are going to dump in the next 24 to 48 hours? I mean, what if that is consistently happening? Are you going to be able to plan between your breaks of weather in order to get these homes printed up? I don't think that's going to be the next big move in building industry. I mean, it's going to exist, don't get me wrong. I mean, I believe it's going to occur, but I think if you're looking for something that's going to be the big change, the big industry change to building, it's going to come from cross-laminated timber. The cross-laminated timber industry is absolutely going to change the way that new construction is done, especially when it comes to high-rises, institutional buildings like hospitals or schools or anything like that. You're going to start seeing cross-laminated timber very much, taking a huge position within this industry, moving away from concrete and steel and moving into all wood construction, even with high-rise buildings. See, most of the time you didn't see a lot of high-rise or wood construction when it came to like apartment buildings or office buildings or something like that, because wood construction had a limitation on how tall you can build because of the fire issues. Like the ladder trucks for putting out a fire, the firefighters, they could only reach so high. Right? So any kind of wood construction that went beyond a certain amount of floors, they just didn't permit them or allow them to exist. Well, the cross-laminated timber industry is a much different fashion of building that doesn't have the fire issues, like the fire hazard issues that a typical wood construction building would have. The cross-laminated timber industry has found that when these buildings, when there is an actual fire in these buildings or occurring with these structures, that it doesn't actually burn through the beams. It'll char the outside, but for the most part they don't burn through, and so it almost is a fire resistant style, even though it is made out of wood. Same thing with the rot resistance and the bugs and all this other stuff. They've pretty much solved all these problems. Now, it's not an exact efficient, so that it is like by far the best way or the cheapest way or the most efficient way to put a building together, but it's getting better, and it's moving into a position in which that it's starting to become better than steel and concrete, in the sense that there's like seismic issues that concrete and steel these things out, like cross-laminated timber will outperform concrete and steel. And then even better on top of this system, for this system, is that concrete and steel construction usually is very environmentally impactful. Like not only just the CO2 emissions that come from, concrete and steel, but then just the actual location of the construction site itself can be very impactful for the surrounding neighborhood. When it comes to cross-laminated timber construction, all these pieces are assembled in a factory or put together in a factory someplace else, and then they're shipped to the location and then literally picked off the truck and put into place. So it's like an assembly on site, not fabrication, right? The fabrication took place at a factory. This is just an assembly spot. So it's much more environmentally less impactful to the neighborhood in that sense. So these things are becoming very popular for those reasons, right? Seismic reasons, environmental reasons, even like the idea of I'm not somebody who's into like the gold green movement or anything like that, but whatever. I mean, people are into it, so they talk about it. This is a way that you can actually lock carbon up into the building. Like when you're putting a steel concrete building together, you are releasing carbon into the atmosphere. When you put a cross-laminated timber building together, you are locking that carbon up inside of that wood fiber, and unless it catches fire or rots, then the carbon is locked up in there forever. So it's actually a very green product, even though you're cutting down trees to use it. And then on top of it, when you think about the trees that they use to make these cross-laminated timbers, it's a lesser product than what they would use when they're like the timber itself, the trees. They can make this cross-laminated timber out of a less quality tree than they would be making lumber from. So when they make actual lumber, 2x4s, 2x6s, they need a premium timber for that. Well, the cross-laminated timber industry, because they're laminating all these things together, they don't need that high quality timber. They can make it out of a less quality timber and come up with still a very, superior product. So, to me, cross-laminated timber industry is definitely going to be the thing to keep an eye out on, as far as major changes to the industry. What time is it? Oh, guys, I got a few more minutes here and then I got to call it quits. But, there's a lot of comments in here. Okay, let me cruise down to the bottom. Mass timber is the future. Look at all the timber frame buildings that have lasted hundreds of years, even with minimal maintenance. Yeah, and I agree. I mean, I don't know if necessarily going back in history and looking at the timber buildings comparatively to what is the mass timber industry is going to do, like the cross-laminated timber industry is going to do. But I mean, I agree that it is going to be a very impactful new style of building, and it's not even that new. I mean, this is kind of older technology, but it's really starting to become more popular in use. Like even the Portland airport here just recently has used a lot of new cross-laminated timber to remodel the Portland airport, and it's a pretty cool airport. I mean, I just went there a couple of weeks ago, and it was different walking through the place because it was, I'm used to going to the airport the way I remember it being, and so they've changed it around. But it's a nice airport. It's really cool, and all the, the architecture in there is really nice. And, yeah, it's all wood framed and stuff. $3 from Q Essence. Thank you so much for that $3 super sticker. Very generous of you and supporting the Uneducated Economist. I can never thank you guys enough for that. They've even developed 3D printers that can print steel now and aluminum. Remember to like the video and support the channel, please. So thank you very much, Brody. Good for earthquakes, yeah. Is it cost effective? Not as much yet, but I think that's really due to the fact that it's in its infancy, right? That once the industry starts really ramping up and you find more production taking place, that the cost of it is going to become more comparable or competitive, or however you want to look at it. But as of right now, I don't believe that the cost of it is as competitive as, say, doing concrete and steel construction. But it's getting there, right? It takes time. All right. Yeah, because I want to work in a skyscraper made of wood. Actually, you might not have a problem with it if you've ever been in one of these buildings. They're actually quite nice, and so, it probably wouldn't bother you if you I know, maybe it'll bother you. It wouldn't bother me none. All right. Structural stone is unfortunately far too laborious to solve our building issues. Golem post for pole buildings are getting closer to standard wood post. All right. Okay, I'm gonna give a couple more here, and then I gotta go. All right. Are you talking about glue lamps? Okay, glue lamination. It is. It's a little different, but it's very similar to that of like a glue lam beam, but they make it huge, right? Like the whole floor system is like glue lam beams, like literally set up alongside of each other, and they build them like the entire floor system, wall systems, everything is like all these giant glue lam beams, put together. But it's but yes, as long as it's not a fire. And that's the thing. They found that these things are actually fairly fire resistant, as even a fire that's breaking out in one of these rooms or in the building itself, it doesn't burn through the timbers, right? It'll char the outside. But like typical wood construction, it has lots of air gaps between the pieces of wood. So like you got your studs, you got your sheathing, you got these beams, you got these floor systems, and there's all this gap between the pieces of wood. Well, that gap is the air that flows in that gets the fire really ripping through the entire building. Cross-laminated timber, there's no gaps. There's no space in between for the fire to work its way through. It has to literally burn its way completely through a thick beam before it can find its way into other parts of the building to catch fire. So because of that, it literally just doesn't burn through the wood, It'll char the outside really good, but it doesn't necessarily cause the fire to engulf it. Essentially, massive glue lam and finger various jointed beams, something of that nature. So synthetic materials and 3D printed houses is the future. I don't know about the 3D printed part. Like, I think a lot of people are excited about that and think that that's the way to go about it, because it's like essentially takes away the labor cost or the labor part of issues to it. But I find that there's so many questionable parts to that I just I can see it being used in some areas of the country, especially if you're building up a bunch of tract homes. They're all the same, and whatever, and you set up these 3D printers to get them all out. But just for example, in my area, if you wanted to, build a house out in some remote location or whatever, running all the equipment up there and then having the weather be appropriate for that 3D printed home, that seems like it's very questionable on the efficiency and timing and everything else. Like if you do a wood construction home around here, you can plan for anytime you want. Anytime you want. It doesn't matter, So... And you can put it anywhere you want, like even in a remote location. I could use this S10 right here. If I was to put a lumber rack on it, I could build just about any house of any size I want, and I could literally run all the pieces up there out of this little tiny truck. Just saying, you can't really do that with a lot of other types of materials out there. Okay, guys, I've got to go. This was a lot of fun having this live stream. We got 249 people watching. Thank you so much for hitting that like button, with 84 people who have hit that like button, and the $3 in super chats and super stickers, because you guys are always so supportive of the channel. I really appreciate all the support you have ever given the Uneducated Economist. All right, Uneducated Economist, you guys let me know.